Well, it's Friday, and we're going to send you off to your weekend with a fascinating guest, an expert in the Middle East. And what better time to have him come on with this peace summit, so-called as I put it, having been launched in Annapolis, with the United States supporting this, what has turned out to be clearly a dictatorship in Pakistan, and with his own ties to Iran. Stephen Zunes, professor of politics at the University of San Francisco, who recently met with Iranian President Mahmoujd Ahmadinejad, is our guest today. Zunes is a Middle East editor, the Middle East editor for Foreign Policy in Focus. He is the author of scores of articles for both scholarly and general readership on Middle Eastern politics. Stephen Zunes, welcome to News Talk Online on Paltalk.com.
Great to be on.
Great to have you here. Well, it seems like we could probably, any day that we have no guest, reach out to somebody like you and bring you in, and it'll be topical because there's always something going on in that very volatile region. I want to start, if I could, and who knows where this conversation is going to go. Quite often the callers from around the world dictate which direction we end up going in. But I want to start with this peace summit in Annapolis. And I'm wondering if you are as pessimistic about the possibilities as I am. And let me just tell you what my very short take is on it, and then tell me as an expert in the Middle East if I'm on target or if you believe I'm far off base. I believe that the so-called leadership of the Palestinians intend to take over the whole of Israel, and there is a two-pronged approach. They are trying to do it either through terroristic / military means, and through demographics over time. And we just saw Hamas, who some might argue is recognized by most of the Palestinians as their legitimate leadership, not invited to the table, of course, because the United States views, and in my opinion correctly, Hamas as a terrorist organization, saying in a communique it wants all of Israel, basically acknowledging my long-time view on the matter. I just don't see, having seen Oslo, which resulted in Nobel Peace Prizes, basically fail, Camp David 1 fail, Camp David 2 fail. How is this going to work when in reality perhaps nobody in the so-called leadership of the Palestinians truly wants a two-state solution? It's really not about that.
Share your pessimism, but for different reasons. I mean, I think there's no question that Hamas is wants all of Palestine back for the Palestinians, but they don't represent the majority of Palestinian perspectives. They won the plurality of the vote in the last Palestinian parliamentary election. So exit polls showed that most of their voters didn't agree with Hamas's hardline Islamist, or their version of Islamist governance, or their terrorism, or their desire to destroy Israel. They voted for them primarily because they figured that Fatah was corrupt and inept, and given that Fatah's efforts at going a more diplomatic direction had not won much, since Israel was still continuing to demolish houses and build more settlements and that kind of thing, they figured they had nothing to lose, and at least they might get some clean local government. Abbas and the main line of Fatah, I don't think there's been a great moral shift in terms of recognizing Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, but I think they are pragmatic enough to realize that there's nothing they can do about it, and that they need to live with Israel. The PLO formally recognized Israel on 78% of historic Palestine back in 1993, and so they are really pretty much all they're asking for right now is the remaining 22%, West Bank and Gaza Strip, shared co-capital of Jerusalem, but perhaps some very minor and reciprocal border adjustments. So in certain ways, the Palestinian position is more moderate, more consistent with international law than the current Israeli position, which is to annex these large swaths of West Bank territory to incorporate these illegal settlements into Israel itself, which would essentially divide up a new Palestinian state into 4 non-contiguous cantons, which would not really be much of a viable state.
Well, I guess you and I aren't going to view this one the same way, but that's fine. As I recall, Israel has completely left the Gaza in an attempt to trade land for peace. And rather than effecting a peace, and I recognize that one can argue that the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians in the Gaza is one such that one might argue it makes it difficult, especially with little freedom of movement for security reasons, the two, little opportunity for the Palestinians to expand economically, etc. But the sad reality is that the territory that was from which Israel withdrew has been used as a launching pad for the firing of 3,000 rockets into Israel. That doesn't look to me to be a very good faith effort on the part of the Palestinians.
No, of course,
what was
of course
a good faith effort by the Israelis?
Yeah, it was certainly not a good faith effort to lob rockets into civilian areas of Israel, just like it was not a good faith effort of Israel to bomb civilian areas of Gaza. Both are certainly wrong. The problem was that Israel's move was unilateral. There was not a negotiated withdrawal, because withdrawal, while it did bring out the Israeli colonists, the settlers in the Gaza Strip, they were supposed to have left many, many years ago, because the Fourth Geneva Convention forbid occupying powers to transfer their civilian population onto land seized by military force. And there are no less than 4 UN Security Council resolutions, as well as a World Court decision that said that Israel had to pull those folks out. So it wasn't like a great sacrifice on Israel's part, because they shouldn't have sent the settlers in there in the first place. But in any case, it was not really a total withdrawal, because, for one thing, Israel still forbid the Palestinians from opening their seaport, from opening their airport. They largely control the border into Egypt. I mean, obviously, Israel had every right to shut off their border with Gaza if they wanted to, but in many ways, it was still, for all intents and purposes, under siege. And so, again, that was not the kind of thing that helped bring goodwill, and certainly was one of the things that contributed to the rise of the Hamas and the more extremist elements. Again, it certainly doesn't justify lobbing rockets into civilian areas. But I don't think that is necessarily a harbinger of what would happen in a negotiated settlement, where there would be an independent, viable Palestinian state that could engage in international trade and the like, and would not be, essentially surrounded in the way Gaza has been.
Of course, they had an opportunity in Camp David too to affect that, and Arafat at the time.
Actually, no. The proposal that brought David in Camp David was only slightly better than what Ord is offering now, in terms of it would have been Israel, only about 75% of the West Bank would have been free of Israeli occupation, and it would have been, again, kind of divided up in these non-contiguous cantons. However, they came very close. The negotiations continued, and in Taba in January of 2001, the following year, despite all the violence going on, the two sides kept meeting. And